Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know where you are. My name is Victor. I'm from Mexico City. We are with Jose. He's from Lisbon, right?
I'm from Lisbon, yes. I'm the lead teacher of the Web Development Bootcamp at the Lisbon campus.
Amazing. So, thanks everyone for connecting. Let's wait a couple minutes for more people to get connected. We don't want anyone to lose anything from this amazing webinar. So, for start making some time, please start answering the poll. I wrote down here a poll where you can answer. So please tell us, how long have you been coding? If you are new, you have less than a year, you have more than 4 years. I see we have some people that are really experimented in coding. So that's great. Um, and also, please tell us, where are you from? Where are you watching this webinar from? Like we have had some people from Madrid, some people from Berlin, from Mexico City, of course, from Miami. So we have people from all around the world. So please tell us. Please tell us here in the chat, where are you from? Natalia from Lisbon, amazing. From the Netherlands, Paris, Barcelona, Portugal, Amsterdam, France, Helsinki, Miami. Great. So we have people from all around the world. That's great. That's great. Ecuador, amazing. We have people from Central America. Amazing. So it's great to have people from all around the world. Great. So well, let's wait a couple minutes so we can start. So more people can join. So maybe in the meantime, Jose, you want to present yourself?
Sure. So again, my name is Jose. I've been working as a full stack developer for a few years. In the meantime, I've been teaching the web development bootcamp at Ironhack Lisboa. I'm in my 5th cohort right now. It's been a lot of fun so far. I think everyone has a great time. The students end up having successful careers afterwards, and this makes me very happy. And this is why I recommend the Ironhack experience to anyone.
Great, great, great. So let's see how the poll is doing. So we have 11 people that are basically new in coding. So you will learn a lot from today. People who has less than a year, we have 13 people who has less than a year, and we have 5 people who has been coding for more than 4 years. So you are the experimented guys from the class. So you may help us with answering questions in the chats if you see some. So the people who are really experimental in coding, please help the other ones who are new, that are the most, to answer their questions. That would be like really great.
That would be amazing.
Also, well, we will be starting in a couple minutes. But first, I wanted to talk about a little bit about Ironhack. Ironhack is a global school of technology. We are in 9 campuses. Let me try to remember. It's Mexico City, Miami, Sao Paulo, Barcelona, Madrid, Lisbon, Netherlands, Paris. I'm missing one. Berlin. That's right. So we have 9 campuses all around the world, and also we are launching one remote campus where you can take the web development bootcamp anywhere you are. Doesn't matter where you are. I see we have people from, for example, Ecuador or Helsinki, where we don't have actually a campus. Well, you can take the remote bootcamp. So it's basically the same Ironhack experience, but wherever you are. So we take the Ironhack experience to wherever you are. We have 3 main courses. The web development one, where Jose also can help me to explain a little bit better what the web development bootcamp is. Maybe a little bit. You want to explain?
Sure. So if you want to become a web developer, the 10-week full-time web development bootcamp gives you all of the tools that you need to get started with the junior. There's also a part-time option. So if you're working in the meantime and you want to do the bootcamp, you can also do it in 6 months. And as Victor said, right now, we got started a few months ago with a remote bootcamp that has been very successful so far. Basically, you're going to get the tools that you need if you just want to become a junior developer and get into the industry.
Yeah, as he said, the remote bootcamp has been really successful. It's not recorded classes. It's not like any other platform where you just go and see a video. You have live teachers, live expert teachers, as Joe said, teaching you how to code and teaching you like the Ironhack way. We also have UX UI design bootcamps and data analytics bootcamps. So if you are interested in Ironhack, in taking any bootcamp, please contact me. I will leave you my email here, or go to ironhack.com, and there you will find all the information about Ironhack. So I think we are ready to go. We're ready to go. We have many people connected. So great. Jose, you want to begin?
Yes, Victor, I'm going to share something with you right now on Slack.
Okay, perfect.
I would ask you to place on the highlighted section here on Crowdcast. And This is a link to an example that everyone can follow and you can open. And this is going to be our starting point. Because today, you're going to be coding along with me, okay? So I'm going to start casting my screen. Share screen.
Okay, now you can find the link Jose wants you to open down here in where it says code for the webinar. So just click there and you will find the code.
So what you should be seeing is this. So you have essentially this screen right now that has 3 sections to it. So you have a balance, you have a breakdown of expenses and income, and then we have a footer where we have an input, a select box, and a button that is going to allow us to either add an expense or add an entry to our income list. So what we're building here is a budgeting web app. What we're going to end up with in the end is an app in which you can add your income, you can add the expenses you're having, and essentially you are going to see the balance that you have at any given moment. As you might have noticed, this is already a bit stylized because I didn't want us to spend time working too much with CSS. This is mainly a JavaScript and DOM manipulation webinar right now. So this is what we're going to be focusing on. So for the most part, I already wrote the HTML. I already wrote the CSS. So you're not going to have to do a lot with that. And we are just essentially going to be adding a few IDs, a few attributes to our HTML elements. And we are going to be using some DOM manipulation in order to make everything work. Is this clear? I'm reading everything you're writing in the chat, in the sidebar. So if you want to let me know anything, please write it out, okay? And I will read it. Oftentimes, something will break for a student. If this happens, do write something, let us know. I might or might not be able to help you with, depending on the issue that's happening. So this might be something that's easy to debug just from seeing your error message or whatever happens, versus being a harder problem to figure out. If that does happen, if you do leave a message, I will try to address it at the end, okay? So what you need to do is you have my code right here. This is Code Sandbox. Code Sandbox is a platform that allows me to write code online, to see the results straight away, and to edit and share it. And what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to fork this example. So when you're forking what I built, so what I shared, all of this, you are creating your own version of this particular exercise. So if everyone goes ahead and forks it, you will start with a brand new version of this exercise that you can edit for yourselves, and that's not going to change anything on my side, okay? So anything that you do after forking this is on your side. If you want to get back to start fresh, you can always go back to my example and create a new fork, okay? So this is how it works. Now, again, the target for this webinar is not necessarily people who have never coded one single line in their lives. I do expect people to have seen at least HTML, okay? So you don't need to worry about the CSS. You don't need to worry about the way this is stylized. But right here, you have some HTML that has been written for you. And if you've never seen HTML in your life, it might be a bit hard to get exactly what we're going to do here. But I think that this is our audience. So I'm going to click on this button on the right side, right top navbar in Code Sandbox that allows me to open this example in a new window, meaning what I'm building here, I can see it in a new window. I'm going to click that. And this is it. This is what I'm building. If I switch between these, I'll be able to view the editor view, which has the result on the side, but I will also be able to see this in one page by itself without any interference from the editor. I'm just going to use this to show you exactly what's going on with our HTML document and how our page is structured, okay? So if you've ever written a bit of HTML or even a bit of JavaScript or CSS, you know that you can break those into multiple files. You can have HTML files, JavaScript files, CSS files. Right now, we just have our index.html file right here in which we have the structure of our document. So this is all of the content. That's what we have here. If you look at it, you will see that we have some meta information about the page. So this is some information that's not necessarily being displayed on the page, but is used by the browser to infer what should be displayed. And then we have the body tag, where we have all of the information that is currently being displayed on the page. At the end of the body tab, I'm just including my JavaScript file. What do we have in the body tag? So inside, we have this header element, this section element, and this footer element. So each of those correspond to one of the parts of this application. So I'm looking at this in Chrome DevTools. If you have Chrome or if you have Safari or Firefox, they have similar developer tools. You can do what I'm doing. So I'm seeing that we have these three portions: a header, a section, and a footer. Again, inside of the header, we just have a heading saying this is the balance that we're going to have. Then we have a span, which is just a piece of text that holds the actual value that is in the balance at that moment. Then in the section, I have a breakdown of all expenses and all of the income that I have. This is an unordered list that has a few list items, so LIs, and each of these list items stands for one of the entries in our balance or in our budget application. Each of these entries has a description, which is in this EM tag. EM stands for emphasis or emphasize. That's why it looks kind of italic. We have a plus or a minus sign that is basically saying this is income, this is an addition, or this is a subtraction, this is an expense. And finally, we have the value that's being either added or subtracted. Then you'll notice that these are styled either with green or reddish tones, because if something is income, I want it to be styled with a green background. If it's an expense, I want it to be styled with a red background. You'll see how we can do that in a minute. Lastly, we have this footer. This footer is an element that contains an input where the user is going to say, I want to add an entry of $50, and you are going to select if it's an expense or income, and you're going to click on Add. As soon as the user clicks on Add, we should be adding one line right here with either the expense or the income, okay? In the meantime, I added this description right here, but I did not insert an input field for description. So for now, we're going to ignore the description. If we have time at the end, we are going to add a description to each entry. Once the user has added an element to the budgeting application, the balance right here at the top should be updated. So when I add an item with 50, I should see one more entry with the expense or the income of 50, and the balance should be updated to, say, 70, if that was an income. Oh, 700, that would be nice. And that's how the app should behave, okay? This is our final goal. Now, we need to try to understand how we're going to do this with JavaScript and with DOM manipulation. If you've never heard about DOM manipulation stands for Document Object Model Manipulation. Essentially, the DOM, or the Document Object Model, is the virtual representation of your document in the browser. So when I'm looking at all of these elements that are being displayed right here, I'm essentially looking at a reflection of the DOM, of the virtual representation that the browser has of all of your elements in that one page, okay? Now we need to understand how we're going to manipulate these, how we're going to add values, how we're going to change things. So what we're going to use for that is some JavaScript, which means it's time for me to go into my script.js file. If you're on Code Sandbox, here on the left bar, you have a few icons. The second one looks like a page, allows you to check every single file that you have on the page. And you'll see here that I left a little message for you saying, hello world. This is something that we usually do when we just want to check if a script is working. What I need to do here is I'm going to need to target a few elements on the page. With a few of them, I'm going to need to get their values. I'm going to need to change other elements' values. And I'm going to need to listen to events that tell me that the user is trying to add something to the budget. Okay, so I'm going to need to target specific elements on the page. What's the easiest way of targeting an element on the page? There are a few. So don't write this yet. But an easy element or an easy way to target an element on the page is by referencing the document global object and using a method that we call getElementById. And passing in the ID of an element. So if we want to get an element, and if we know the ID of that element, we can use that. If we want to get an element and we don't know the ID or it doesn't have an ID, but we know a few other things about it, such as where it's located on the page, we can use query selector. And these are the two main ones that I'm going to be using. Alternatively, you have get elements by class name, you have query selector all. These are the ones that we're going to need. So this is how we're going to find the elements on the page. Which elements do I need to find on the page? So for this, I'm going to need to have access to the balance that I have right here, because later I will need to update this balance. Is the stream lagging for anyone else? Is the stream lagging for you? Okay. Trust me, I'm on a gigabyte connection. It's weird that it's lagging on my side. This is strange. Okay. Okay, if it starts lagging again, can you let me know? A few people are saying they refreshed and now it's okay. Other people are saying it's just okay. So if it happens to you again, or if this happens again, let me know, okay? Okay, so we're going to need to target a few elements on the page. I'm going to need to target this total balance. to be able to change it later when something changes. I'm going to need to target this input to be able to figure out which value the user is adding. I'm going to need to target this select box to be able to say if this is an expense or an income. I need to target this add button to listen to any click event on this add button. And then I'm going to need to target the list of budget entries, both the expenses and the incomes. Okay? Is this clear so far? Okay. So we're going to do the following. Since I only have one balance element on the page, or one element in which we're going to output the total balance, and that is this span element right here, I'm going to go ahead and give it an ID attribute. And you can add an attribute to an HTML tag by writing the attribute name inside of the caret signs and saying that it equals something. For me, that equals open double quotes, close double quotes, and between these quotes, I'm going to write balance. So this is the total final balance. Okay. So now having an ID here, I'm going to be able to target this element from my JavaScript code. Okay. So do we need to add IDs to the other elements as well? You could, but I'm going to skip it because I want to show you these two ways of targeting elements. And so I'm going to take advantage of this, and I'm going to show you both ways of doing it. So let me remind you what we need to target, what we need to find. We need to find the total balance. We need to get the value input. We need to get if it's an income or an expense. So someone's asking, how can I see the changes on the screen? You're not going to see my changes. Nope, it's not going to change automatically on your screen because I created my own fork. If you really want to, you can go to my profile and check my last code sandbox, and you'll be able to see this one that I'm editing right now, okay? But if you change something on yours, that's going to be reflected on your side. So I'm going to target the total balance, the value input, the income expense, and the button, condition button. Lastly, I need to target this list. So this is going to be the entry list. And for now, these are the 5 things that I need to target. Let me remind you, if anyone didn't add an ID equals double quotes balance to the span in the balance in the header, you should do it, okay? This is how we're going to be able to access it in a minute. Okay, now we need to be able to access references to all of these elements on the page. So I'm going to do the following. I want to get the total balance. I know that it has an ID, so I'm allowed to call document get element by ID, which is a method, the document object. I can pass in either single quotes or double quotes, both will work, with the name of the ID of the element that I want to target. And this element has the ID of balance. So that's the first element that I want to target. This is good. By calling this, I'm going to get a reference to the balance element. But I need to be able to use this balance element later, not just now. So I need to save it to a variable. I need to declare a variable and assign it the value that I get when I call document get element by ID and pass in the ID balance. So the way that I can save this to a variable is by declaring a variable. I can write var and the name of the variable equals whatever I want to have right there. I'm not going to declare a variable with var though, because at the moment in JavaScript, you have 3 ways declaring variables. You can write const, which stands for constant. You can write let, or you can write var. There are a few differences between them. Let me zoom in just to make sure that this is readable for you. This is a semicolon, okay? So at the end of the line 5, you have a semicolon. Okay, so you have 3 ways of declaring variables. Since I don't plan on changing the reference to this balance later, so I want to keep the same reference, I will use const, then the name of the variable equals document get element by ID. I want to name this variable something that tells me this holds a reference to the balance. So I'm going to call this balance element. Okay, I will wait for you to tell me if you're done with this line or if there's anything else. Any questions so far? You'll have to forgive me, but I need to keep drinking water because it's just so hot in Lisbon. So this is going to be a constant, okay? Okay, perfect. So now we have a reference to the balance element. How can I know if I really do have a reference to the balance element? I can do the following. I can call console.log. So what is my console? The console is essentially a behind the scenes where you're able to look into what's going on with your JavaScript engine, and you're able to see any messages that are being logged to the console or any errors that might be popping up. So I'm going to call console.log to display something to the console. And I'm just going to pass in the balance element. At the end of the line, if you're writing JavaScript, we place a semicolon again. If I save this, you'll see something popping up down here. So Code Sandbox gives you a built-in console that you can open where you can see what's being logged to the console. In this case, if I have my balance elements, if I was able to properly select it, I will see this. If you got the wrong ID, so if I wrote balances instead of balance, you'll get null. So you really do need to get the IDs correct, okay? Okay, so we have a reference to our balance elements. Let's get references to the other elements that we're going to need. Those will be the value inputs. Now, let me remind you that I did not give an ID to the value input, so I need to find a different way to get it. So I'm going to name this variable value input element. Whenever I want to get an element or a node from the page, I call document dot. And now, if I cannot get it by its ID, because it does not have an ID, I need to use an alternative method. I can use query selector. So query selector. Okay. What does query selector get here as a value? If the element that I want to target is this input, and if it's the only input on the page, meaning I know that there's literally only one input right there, I can find it by just passing right here inputs. Okay? If you had multiple inputs in your document, this would target the first one. I can do this because I know that there's only one. Okay? If you had more than one, you would need to find a way to be more specific. But for the input itself, now that's good. Okay? How about the income / expense element, select box? So I'm going to call this the select element. I write const, stands for constant, select element equals. I'm going to query document by saying document.query selector and selecting the select box. Excuse the redundancy. So if I want the select box, which is the only one on the page, I can do the same thing that I was doing with the input in the first place. So here we have a reference to the select element. And we have this addition button. If I want to have my addition button element, I can get it by looking for document dot calling query selector, opening parentheses, closing parentheses. Inside of the parentheses, I want to get the button element. So if you're seeing a trend, you might think I'm just going to write button. But for this particular example, right now I don't, but in the future, I might want to have multiple buttons. If right now I want to target this specific button that we have right here, I need to find a different way. So I know that this is the only button that I'm going to have inside of a footer element. That means I can get it by writing footer space button. So I'm targeting specifically that one button. Last, I need to have a reference to the list of all entries. So I'm going to write const entry list element equals. I'm going to select an element from the DOM by saying query selector. And what I'm going to pass in here is following. I could pass UL. Again, if I had multiple unordered lists on the page, this would only select the first one. I know that I want to target UL, an unordered list, that is inside of the section. So I'm just going to target section space UL. Okay. Now, if I were to log all of those, I'm going to go here, take this element out of there, log it here. And if I were to log every single one of those, you should see in the console that I have a reference to every single one of them. Okay? You don't need to do this, by the way. I'm just showing you if this worked or didn't work. If it didn't work for one of them, you should see null for that in the console. But no, it appears to be correct. So we were able to select the span that contains the balance, the input for the number, the select box, the button, and the unordered list. So we're good. If you're asking yourselves, does it matter what we name these variables? The answer is, in practice, no. You could name this variable A, and you could do everything that I'm going to do right now if you named it something else. We just name variables the way that we do because we want to be explicit. When you look at a variable name, you want to know what's going on with it. Okay? So this is my criteria for naming things. Okay, so we have our 5 elements right there. Now, what's the first thing that I'm going to care about? When the user types something and clicks on the select if it's either income or expense, and then clicks on the add button, I want to add that value to the list right here. How do I do that? So if I want to add something when the button is clicked, I'm going to have to listen to events, to a click event on this specific button. So when the button is clicked, something should happen. To perform an action when the button is clicked, I can do the following. I'm just copying the variable name by selecting it, by double-clicking it and hitting Command-C or Control-C and pasting it right here because I don't want to have to write it all over again. But I do believe that VS Code or Code Sandbox gives you auto-completion. So if you start writing something and if it knows you already have a variable defined or declared with that name, it's going to autocomplete for you when you click on the tab button. Okay, so there we go. Now I want to do something when this button is clicked. So what I can write is on click equals. And if I want to perform something when this button is clicked, I want to perform an action, I need to wrap this action inside of a function. So a function is a structure that we use when we want to use a piece of functionality multiple times in different circumstances. We wrap it into a function. So the way that I'm going to define a function is by writing function, open parentheses, closes parentheses, open curly braces, close curly braces. So let me be super explicit. These are curly braces. These are not square brackets. They're not parentheses. They're curly braces. If you're on a Mac, I believe the shortcut is Shift-Option-8, and Code Sandbox is nice enough to close them for you as well. So it opens and closes. If you're on Windows, this might be Control-Shift and 8 as well. I cannot tell you for sure because a lot of keyboards will be different, but this is probably very accessible and easy to find, okay? So I'm just going to say function, open parentheses, close parentheses, open curly braces, closes curly braces. Inside of these curly braces, no, it's inside of the curly braces, not inside of the parentheses. I'm going to press enter to break into a new line. And this is where I'm going to perform the action that I want to perform when the button is clicked. So for now, to start, we might just want to log a message to the console. It would say something like, button was clicked. Button was clicked. I save this, and you can save by hitting Control-S or Command-S. If I save this, the page refreshes. I can look at my console right there. If I start clicking on the button, I'm seeing this blue number next to the console increasing. This is because there's something being logged to the console. If I open the console again, I'm seeing here the message, button was clicked. So when the button is being clicked, something is happening. So this is working. This is our starting point, okay? Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, so what we're going to do now is the following. When the button is clicked, we want to figure out what value the user inserted into this input. So to get that value, I can access it by referencing the value input element that I had defined right here, line 8. I can reference it, and I can access the value that the user wrote inside by accessing value, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to access that value by selecting or referring to that element sorry, this should not be the addition button element. This now should be the value input element. So I'm going to target the value input element and get the value that the user inserted inside. Okay, all good. But I want to do something with this value. So for now, I'm going to assign it to a variable. I'm going to declare a variable that's going to hold the value or the amount of money that the user inserted into the input. I can call this amount. Maybe that makes it more clear. This is the amount of money. Okay. Then after that, I also want to get whether this is an income or an expense. So I need to get the value of the select box or figure out which value is selected. So I'm going to access select element dot value to get the value of the select element. Then if I want to get which type of operation that is and save it into a variable, I'm going to write const, the name of the variable, so operation, because I want to know whether it's plus or a minus, and that. Okay, for now, let's just log to the console both the amount, comma, operation, because I want to see both values. When the button is clicked right now, I should see both values in my console. By the way, responding to a chat question, you're not able to see my code being refreshed right now, because if you follow the link on the screen, you will see the basic version that you can get started with. In the end of the webinar, I'm going to share the finished version. Okay, so then if you want to use that one for reference, I will share it with you. Okay. Now I save this file. This was refreshed. As soon as I start adding a value and then select income, press add. If I look at the console, right now we have 1, 2, 3, and we have expense. I think this might have been an oversight on my part. If I now select expense, we're still seeing 1, 2, 3 expense. So what I'm seeing here is that independently of which value I'm selecting here, I'm seeing that it's an expense. So if I go to my HTML and if I look at it, in the option for income, I bet that the value that's set there is expense. So this was an oversight. If you're following along, please let's correct this. Let's go to the index.html file. Let's scroll down. And here in the option for income, I should not have expense, I should have income. So this is line 33 in the HTML. If you haven't changed anything in the meantime, you should just change this from expense to income. Okay. So now when I add a value and it's income, in my console, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3 income. When it's an expense, we'll see 1, 2, 3 expense. Okay? Perfect. Now going back to my JavaScript, I have the amount and the operation. This means that I'm ready to add an item to this list. Perfect. Now, how am I going to do this? And shall I do that right here? I would say no. Let's break things down into smaller pieces, because one of the principles that we try to follow when building software is the principle of abstraction, which means you don't want to concentrate too much functionality into one single function or one single class into just one place. You want to break it down into multiple functions. So I'm going to create one new function that just takes the amount, the operation, and adds one entry to the list of operations. I'm going to call this function add entry. I'm going to say that it takes as arguments the amount is in the input and the operation that is being performed. So operation. If everything's gone right, you should be seeing a red squiggly line underneath the function name, the add entry name. This is because we haven't declared this add entry function yet. We need to do it before we're able to call it. So what I'm going to do is, before adding the onClick event listener, I'm going to define the function add entry. As you're seeing right here, this add entry function is going to take an amount and an operation. So I'm going to add open parentheses, closes parentheses, and inside I'm going to tell the JavaScript engine that this function takes an amount and an operation. Okay. Now I want to do something with those values, so I add curly braces, open curly braces, close curly braces, and I'm going to add one entry to this list with that value. How do I do that? I already have a reference to the list, which means that I should be able to just place things inside this list. Okay, if you look at the markup that we currently have, this is what a list item looks like. So a list item is an li element. It has an em element, a span, and a strong inside. The em for now has the description. I'm not going to add anything in the em. I'm just going to leave it as an empty element. Then the span has the operation type, whether it's a plus or a minus. Then the strong just has the value for the operation. So what I want to do in that function is create one of these list item elements with all of these sub-elements inside. Additionally, this list item element should have a class saying whether it's an income entry or an expense, okay? So right here, we need to create a list item. How do we create an element through JavaScript? I'm going to create it and assign it to a variable that I'm going to call list entry. I'm going to say that that equals the following. Document dot create element, open parentheses, and the name of the tag that should be used with that element, which in this case is the list item. Okay, that's the list item right there. For now, I'm going to skip a few of these and I'm just going to go straight ahead for the value. So if I want to also create a value that I then append to this list entry that is then appended to the list entry list element, I need to create one element with this tag, which is the strong tag. You can call document create element. The tag for that is strong. And I'm going to call this variable list entry value equals that. Now, how do I place this amount of money into this list entry value before appending the list entry value to the list entry itself? I should do something like this. I can say that list entry value, but inner text, this is the text content of the list entry value, and I'm going to say that that equals the amount of money. Okay. And for now, let's just kind of keep this like this. There are going to be a couple of changes to this. Okay, so we have our list entry, the list item, and our list entry value, which is the place where you have the amount of money. What do I need to do now? I need to append this value to the list entry itself. To append the value to the entry, I can call list entry dot append child, which is a method that you can call on DOM nodes or DOM elements to add a child node inside. And the child that I'm going to append is the list entry value. Okay. At last, how do I append the list entry itself to the entire entry list element? I can call entry list element dot append child and pass in the list entry value. So what we're doing here is we are creating an LI, list item. We are creating a strong element that is going to take in the amount of money. We are appending that element to the list entry that we had previously created, and then we are appending that list entry to the entry list element, which is this unordered list that contains all of these elements. Okay, all good so far. Let's see the results of this. So if I write a number in the inputs, I select expense, for example, and I click on add. Here we have this. This does not look pretty, but we are adding things to the list. If I keep on just writing numbers and clicking on add, things are being added to the list. This is the first stage that I wanted to get to, okay? So we're handling the click event on the button. We're being able to append a list item to the list with that value. Okay, missing a few things. First, I need to add this description element, otherwise this is not going to be correctly styled. So I do need to do that, even though I'm not adding any description at the moment. So what I need to do is I need to, as I'm creating a list entry value right here and setting its value, I need to do the same for these two other elements. So for the description and for the operator that we have right there. Okay. So for the descriptor, I will have my list entry description equals document dot create element, as I'm creating an element, and the tag for the description right now is EM. So it's just some emphasized or italic text. The text contents for that are going to equal, so list entry description dot inner text. So the text content for that, for now, is just going to equal string that says description. So if I'm placing some text inside, this text needs to be a string, and a string is defined by having double quotes or single quotes around it. So this content is a string. Okay, let me add just one entry, see if it's working. So nothing changed from what we had before to what we have now, because we are creating this description, but we are not appending it to the list entry. If it's the first item that we want to have in the list entry, then it's the first thing we should append. So before appending the list entry value, I'm going to call list entry append child, and I'm going to append the list entry description. Saving, let's see the results. So there you go. We have the description, you have the value. We're still missing the operator. So we need to create one more element. This is the list entry operator that is going to equal document dot create element. So you might be seeing a trend here. And the tag for that element is going to be span. Now, what content should we have inside? To edit the content of list entry operator, I will say list entry operator dot inner text to change the inner contents of that. And right now, I want to have either a plus sign or a minus sign. But what I have right here in the operation is not a plus or a minus. It's in fact a expense or income string. So the value that I'm getting in operation does not say plus or minus. It says expense or income. How can we place a plus if it's an expense, a minus if it's an income right here? There are multiple ways around this problem. You could use something that's a bit more advanced in JavaScript called a ternary expression. But maybe the cleanest way, or the simplest way, would be to add a conditional, an if statement, and say, if the value for operation is income, then set the inner text to plus. If it's expense, set the inner text to minus. That's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to add an if statement right here. You can do a conditional in JavaScript by writing if parentheses. And we will check if the operation is income. To check that, we can write if parentheses operation equals 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 triple equals. If you just do one single equals, this will not work. Let's do operation triple equals string. And if we're checking for income, I'm just going to write income. And then I want to do something if this condition is true, if the operation is income. To do that, I will add open curly braces and close curly braces. And I will move this line where we were setting the inner text to that if statement. So right now it's inside of the if statement. And if it's income, I want it to get a plus sign. So I'm just going to say that the inner text equals quotes with a plus sign inside. Now, if the operation is not income, if it's an expense, I want to check if it's an expense. There are two alternatives here. We could either say if it's not an income, it's going to be an expense for sure, in which case you would just check if else, meaning if the condition is not met, else we want to do something else. But if we want to be super strict and really only allow for income or expense, we can check else if we're checking if the operation is income, we're doing something. Else if, meaning this is not true, but if the following is true, and the following is going to be operation triple equals expense. If that is true, then I'm going to change list entry operator dot inner text to a minus. Okay, I saved the whole thing. We're missing one thing from this function, from the add entry function, which is we are creating the list entry operator, we're setting its value, but then we're not appending it to the list entry. To have it in the correct place, we should append it between the description and the value. To do that, I will call list entry dot end child and pass in the list entry operator. So this way, we are inserting all of these into the list entry and then inserting the list entry into the list itself. Saved. We will write something. Select expense and add. Very good. We have description minus that. A different number, income, and add. Very good. Now, a tiny issue right here. These values have a $sign at the end. And by the way, in this application, we're assuming that the values are always going to be in one single currency. And we're choosing US dollars for this. How do I place a US dollar after the name right here? Excuse me, after the amount of money. So I have that amount of money right here and placing it inside of the list entry value element. And I can append or add a $sign to the end by writing, instead of just equals amount, I can write equals amount plus open quotes $sign. So now this list entry value inside is going to have this value with a $sign at the end. Save this. Add some value. Click income, click add. All good. There's one thing missing. This is an income entry, and we want it to look greenish when it's income and reddish when it's expense. But again, how were we doing that? We were adding a class to the list item saying either income or expense. So how can I add a class to the list item? Right here. I will do it by doing the following. So right after reading this list item element, I'm going to access list entry dots. I can change the classes of an element by accessing class list. So it's list entry dot class list, and I can add a class by writing again dot add open parentheses, and I just wanted to have the class with the name of the operation. So I'm just going to pass in the value for the operation. Save this, a certain value. If it's income, it should be green. That's a lot of money. If the value is an expense, it should be red. Okay, so we are successfully adding our entries to our budget application. This is good so far. A few things that are missing. When the user adds an expense or an entry for income, we want to add it, but then we don't want to keep this value around, right? Because this should probably go back to 0, and then the user would be able to add a new value. Or it should go to an empty status, and then the user should be able to write a new value. How can we do that? So scrolling down on the on-click event handler for the button, what we're doing is we're getting the amount and the operation from both of these elements. We're calling add entry with that amount and with that operation. But after adding the entry, I no longer care about the value that I have right here in the input. What I can do is the following. I can change the value of the input programmatically by writing value input element dot value, so the value inside, and I want to make that into an empty string. So I'm just going to say that it equals open quotes, close quotes. Okay. Now, when the user adds something, that value is added, and this is emptied. Okay. So someone's saying color is not working. Are you adding the operation to the class list? So in your add entry function, you have your list entry. We are accessing list entry dot class list and calling the method add and passing in a certain operation. And this should add a class with that name, which styles the entry. Okay. Okay. If you're having problems, things are breaking, you might want to open the console for your project and see what's in the console, because oftentimes there's going to be an error message here, okay? And these error messages are usually very telling. So they tell you straight away that you wrote something wrong on line 5. They're going to alert you to this. So looking at the console might be useful for you, okay? For a few people, this is apparently breaking. I will be sharing the final code in the end, okay? If you think that you cannot code along right now, I would recommend that you pay attention to what we do until the end, and then you make the comparison and you add anything that you might need. Okay, we're almost done. Almost done, because what are we missing? We are not updating the final balance. So we are adding things to the list with either a plus or a minus sign. We're not updating the final balance. So I want to update the final balance when something is added. How can I do that? So after the user clicks on add, we're getting the amount, the operation, adding an entry, changing the value to 0, but then I also want to update the balance here. I could do all of that logic of updating the balance right here in line, but again, if we want to follow the principle of abstraction, we might want to create a function just to update the balance. And when this function is called, the balance gets updated, okay? So I'm going to call this function simply update balance, open parentheses, close parentheses, okay? We haven't defined this update balance function yet, so I will. I'm going to call it function update balance. By the way, let me just warn you, this last part is going to get a tiny bit more complex than the rest, okay? But bear with me. So when we update the balance, we want to look at every entry in the list, and we want to keep a total. And if we have an entry that is an income, we want to sum that amount to our total. If it's an expense, we want to decrease that amount. And then, at last, we want to update the final balance, okay? So how are we going to get all of these? The best way to get each of the children of the unordered list would be by doing the following. Let me take out these console logs because I don't need them anymore. I already concluded that we were selecting things correctly. The element that I care about right now is the entry list element. So I have right here my entry list element. Now I need each list item. How am I going to get each list item? So I should be able to access a property called children in the entry list item. Let's just console log right now entry list item dot children and see what we get when we try to access the property children from the list. And this is only going to run when you add something. It's refreshed. Something. So here are our list items. This is good. So we can work from here. I want to iterate over every single one of these list items. How am I going to do that? So there should be a few ways of doing this. I'm going to try the following. Let's see if this works. Let's do what we call a for loop. So we are going to iterate over every single one of these children, every single one of these list items. So in the end, I want to iterate over all list items. I'll just say for let item, so this is going to be a variable item for every single item in that list, of, so let item of, and then the entry list element dot children property. These are all of the items in the list. For now, let me just console log each of the items. Just make sure that we have access to these items right here. I'm going to write something, add, and here are each of the items. This is perfect. So what did we discuss before? What we decided on doing was the following. We would have a variable called total that should start at 0. We iterate over each item. We figure out whether it's an income or an expense. We either add or subtract from the total, and then we update the balance with this total value. Okay? So I'm going to skip what we're doing here inside of the for loop to just go ahead and update the final balance straight away with the value that we have in total. To do that, I will access the balance element but I want to change its inner text. So I'll just write inner text. And I want to set the value for the total, so equals the total. And at the end, if I wanted to have a $sign, I will just do plus $sign. Okay, so what do you assume that we'll get in the balance if we add something right now? We'll get 0 because we're starting with 0, but then we're not adding anything to the total, and we're just changing the value of the balance to $0. So that's what we're getting right now. But for each of the items in the list, I need to get some information. First, I need to get the actual value or the amount of that entry, and then I need to get the operator, whether it's a plus or a minus. And then finally, I do the math, okay? How do I get the value? I can get the value by accessing the element inside of the list item that holds the value and accessing its inner dot text. Excuse me, its dot inner text. Okay, how do I get the value element first? From inside of the list item. I can access it by accessing item and using one of those methods that we saw before in document that are also available inside every single other DOM node. So right now, I can call query selector on the item. And I know that the price or the amount is in the strong element. So I can just query for the strong element. inside of the list item. So that's the value element. How do I get the operator element? I can get the operator element or operation element by querying the item. So item query selector, and the element that contains the plus or the minus sign is span. So I just select for a span. So I have two of those elements right here. I have the value element and the operation element. And note, this is for every single list item. So for every list item on the list, I'm getting the value element and the operation element. Now, how do I get the actual value and the actual operation? I can get the value by accessing the value element dot inner text. But there's an issue with that. If I logged the values right now, you would see that these values are a string that have at the end a $sign. But I'm not going to be able to do math with that because I really need to have this as a number. I cannot have it as some text with a $sign at the end. So how do I extract the numerical value of this? I can get the numerical value or anything that comes before an invalid number or a dot by doing the following. I can call a function that I have available to me called parseInt. ParseInt stands for parse integer. That means parse a string or transform a string into a number without floating points, without a dot, anything else. What parseInt does is it starts reading from the left. It reads 1, 0, it gets to the $sign, and it goes, I don't understand that. I'm going to stop right here. And so it's just going to give me the 10. Okay, so there we have the value. How do I get the operation? I can get the operation by just targeting the operation element, getting its inner text. Okay. Now I have the value and the operation. How do I change the total based on the value and the operation? So if the operation is plus, I want to sum. If it's minus, I want to subtract. And you should listen to what I'm saying very carefully. I'm saying if it's plus, do something. Else, if it's minus, do something else. Which means I'm going to use an if statement. So I'm going to be checking if something, curly braces, do something. Else if, meaning if something else, do something else. So this is how it's going to work. What am I checking in the if statement? What I'm checking is if the operation equals double quotes plus, and I want to sum that value. Else if the operation triple equals minus, I want to subtract that value. Now, how do I sum or subtract from total? You can do the following. So the most clear way of doing this would be assigning a new value to total, so saying that total now equals total plus the value. And the same for the other case in which the operation is minus. Assigning a new value to total, where total now equals total minus value. Okay. I'm going to take out this console log, and let's just see the result of this. So if everything went well, this should be working. Let's cross our fingers. By the way, I'm going to open this on DevTools mode. And I want to look at it as it would be seen on a mobile device. So on a mobile device, it would look like this. If I add some value right now, and I say that it's an expense, and subtract, we're in negative territory. If I add 100 euros, this would be a great find, we're in positive territory. If I add a lot of money, which would be great, I have a lot of money right here. If I subtract some money, we lose money. That's it. So essentially, we've done the basics of what we wanted to do right here, okay? I think this is pretty much all you need to get started. If you want to make this a bit more complex, you could add one more input field where the user also writes a description for the expense. So say you're going out to have sushi, you write sushi on the expense field, you take that description and you create one more element, place it inside of the list item, and then again, append the list item to the unordered list. If you wanted to make this more complex, if you wanted to allow the users to remove one of these entries, you could add a button that allows the user to remove. And when the button is clicked, so on the on-click event of that button, remove this entry from the list, and then call the update balance again, and so on. So there's a lot to go on from here, okay? So does a millionaire need a budgeting app? I wouldn't know, I'm sorry. I wish I knew. Do we have any more questions? Victor, are you around? Okay. I'm not sure if Victor is right here at the moment. Does anyone have, is there a Slack for this class? So, sorry, no. Need to stop sharing. If there's a Slack for this class, unfortunately not. We do have a very big Slack workspace for Ironhack students, where more than 5,000 students are right now. A group, any kind of thing where we can group ourselves to continue the exercise. I don't have a personal suggestion. Let's ask Victor. I'm messaging him right now, okay? So I think that Victor lost his video. He told me he's trying to come back. Hi, Victor.
Hi, I'm back. So someone's asking if we have a Slack for this class?
So sorry, I didn't understand.
Well, that someone is asking for a Slack for this class, right?
Yes, but we do not have one, right?
No, we don't have like a Slack channel for this kind of things. Like, well, if you want to chat with the other ones, like what I would recommend is to join the meetup group of your city, and there you can chat with everyone. Like you can contact anyone in your city in the meetup groups. But like for this specific workshop, we don't have like any Slack channel or anything.
So people are asking me for the final code. I'm sharing it right now with you on the chat, okay? Anywhere you can chat and continue this exercise. Victor, do you know if the chat is still available after this stops?
You know, once it stops, you can still write some like entries, but
okay.
You know, this is like the moment. This is the exact moment where we have the most people. So once we are over, no one will connect to this chat. So you know, it doesn't make a lot of sense to come back and chat in here. Well, as I told you, what I would recommend is to go and write on the meetup event, and maybe someone can answer your questions there, or you can Slack us. You can email us. Like I will leave you my email down here. If you have any doubt about Ironhack, maybe about the workshops, about future workshops, I can give you more info about it.
So someone's asking, can you find the complete code later on GitHub? For sure. Give me a minute. I will send it to you on Slack. A link on Slack in a minute, okay? Does anyone have any questions about Ironhack at all? Do we have any students or ex-students right here? I hope that none of my students are here because they have a lab to finish right now. But if anyone else, you've been to Lisbon, it's beautiful. It is beautiful. It's a very nice city. It's very hot right now, though.
Also, remember, you will have the whole recording of the webinar right here in the exact same link we're in. You can find the whole recording. So if you lost something, if you want to look through some part of the code, you will find anything you want. Well, the whole webinar. Also, Jose, I don't know if you looked at the questions down here in the question and answers poll.
I haven't. It wasn't okay.
Yeah, I will read for you. What happens during?
I have the answer. I have the answer to both. What happens during parse int if there is a number with a decimal point? Example, $2.5. The answer is you only get the value 2. You get a number, and that number is 2. If you did want to get the 2.5, you would need to call, instead of parse int, you would call parse float, and float as in floating point number. This would give you the 2.5. There's a third way to get numbers from strings in JavaScript, which is by calling the function number. But if that takes any invalid value, such as a $sign, you lost it. It breaks. So if you wanted to take into account floating point numbers, you could use parse float instead of parse int. Then we have a question. What is if you add a lot of money or subtract a lot of money? Oh, what if you try to add too much money or subtract too much money? So that's a question that one of my students would ask. I'm very glad to see this here. Numbers in JavaScript, and honestly in most programming languages, break at a certain point. So there is a maximum number that you can use with JavaScript. And I think I could very, very quickly show you. I'm sorry for taking more time, Victor, but I think this is an interesting question. So the maximum number that you can use with JavaScript is, let's see, number dot max safe integer. And that's the number. So this is the maximum amount of money I could have in my balance. If I have any more than this, it would break. So that's it. You can be rich, but not this rich. Otherwise, things stop working well. Okay? Thank you for your question. This was interesting. Any more questions? How to avoid add an empty string. You can check if the string is an empty, if value is an empty string, or you can check if the property length of the value equals 0, then you don't want to add anything. So you might want to say if the value or the amount is a string that is larger than a certain number, you want to add. Otherwise, you don't want to do anything else. So you can do this logic with if statements and else if statements, okay? Okay, perfect, it's working. I'm going to share the GitHub link with you in a minute as soon as I get to write this. So this is solution of the budgeting app for webinar. Okay, let's see. Thank you so much for the positive messages. This makes me very happy. It makes it worth the 2 hours at the end of the day. And thank you for attending, really.
Yeah, thanks everyone, every single one of you for attending since the beginning to the end. Like, we have a lot of people still interacting. That's amazing. Also, we have Rixio, who left his LinkedIn profile so you can still work together. So that's amazing. We are building a great community down here. So that's amazing. Well, thanks, Joseph. Thanks for your support. Thanks for the webinar. It was amazing. I think everyone liked it. Remember, we have the recording of the whole webinar up here in the same link. Just wait till the webinar is over, and you will be able to find it. Any questions? You can Slack me. You can email me. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. You can ask me whatever you need about Ironhack, or go to ironhack.com and you will find any info you need about the bootcamps. So, any last message, Jose?
No, thank you so much again. Thanks to you as well, Victor. This was very, very good. I would like to do one more of these again soon, please.
Of course. So goodbye, everyone. See you in the future. Bye-bye.
See you.